Hi, I'm Mitch. Thank you for joining us on the Restoration Road where culture connects with Christ. Today we're going to explore the sand heart, one that's loose, licentious, scattered, blowing in the wind, similar to the prodigal in Jesus' parable of the two sons. You know, in my own life, I began to see the sand-heartedness kind of creep up in high school and college. And it was my sophomore year in college when I made international publicity. I was working auctioning and selling classic cars privately. And my dad called me one night before the Labor Day weekend auction when it was still at DeKalb High School, and he said, your favorite person's just got clearance, and he's gonna land his helicopter at the auction tomorrow. You should meet him when he comes off. And he said, guess who it is? And I said, do you mean Tom Monahan, owner of Domino's Pizza, the Detroit Tigers? He says, that's right. And he did. And that next day his jet helicopter landed, and I met him to pick him up at the helicopter and take him about 200 steps to the auction. And in those 200 steps, he talked about the most expensive cars in the world that he would like to create for a car collection. But he liked the idea of owning one particular car and promoting it in his business. Well, I had just searched for a one-of-a-kind Duesenberg for a different customer of ours, but when I found it, he wasn't prepared financially to acquire the car. And it would indeed be $1 million cash, the most expensive car ever sold, the first car to ever sell for $1 million cash. Well, in those 200 steps, I shared that information with Mr. Monahan, and we made an appointment. During the singing of the national anthem, I saw him write down in his calendar that I was going to meet him about purchasing this car. He decided to do it. In fact, he said, Mitchell, can I just give you the $1 million and you go get it? And I said, no, I really think you should see the car before you become the first man to ever buy one for $1 million. So we flew in his private jet, and on the way there, he was made aware that the gentleman that he had purchased the Detroit Tigers from had a heart attack, and Mr. Monahan was stunned. And while I felt for the family, I was wondering if Mr. Monahan was going to turn the jet around, because the man who came back and told him said, sir, shall we go back? And my heart skipped a beat as he thought, and he said, no, I'm going to buy that car. So we headed there and landed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we examined what could be the first $1 million car ever sold. And as we're looking at the Duesenberg, we're standing behind it, and we see this spot on the trunk. And I thought, oh no, there it goes, because it was judged 100 points by the Classic Car Club of America, which basically means perfect. So Mr. Monahan's finger starts to head toward that spot that I saw on the trunk. And I wondered, what's the seller going to say? And Mr. Monahan's finger almost touches the spot on the trunk, and the potential seller, the owner of the car, said, well, almost perfect. And just then, Mr. Monahan's finger touched the spot on the trunk, and it came off. And he said, oh, it was just lint from the trunk. And we all cheered, because he bought the car for $1 million, and he took delivery at home plate in Tiger Stadium. And in fact, when they brought that Duesenberg in from center field, they kicked in the supercharger, and it just echoed in the stadium. And it was awesome. I had just hit a grand slam in Tiger Stadium, and I made international publicity for selling the first car for $1 million cash. I became a rock star auctioneer almost overnight. And it's amazing how that trust in myself began to release more sand in my heart. That I made life all about me and my kingdom and what I wanted to accomplish. And it was part of that journey up, I think, in my sand-heartedness that led to one day that storm to bring me down. But you know, I had roots to turn to. God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, and he talked about how we were designed to follow those. And in the third commandment, God said to Moses, don't make any idols. No idols whatsoever. And he said, you know what? God said, I'll punish the sinners, those who hate me, to the third and fourth generation. But to those who love me, who follow these commands, I'll bless for 1,000 generations. Generation in Hebrew is dor. It means circle. We either live inside God's circle of intimacy and experience life with Him, or we live life outside His circle of intimacy and experience idolatry. Intimacy on the inside, idolatry on the outside. And that circle is a picture of God's love. The Ten Commandments are given to us because God loves us. A picture of a circle today that illustrates this point is a ring. A ring is made of gold, and so it's a picture of abundant love. And it's also a circle that's uninterrupted, which is a picture of eternal love. So that's why in a wedding we give each other a ring. Well, my great-great-grandfather on his deathbed gave my grandfather, when he was 16 years old, his wedding ring. And I have it here. It's a rose gold ring with an onyx setting, and on top of that onyx setting is an English K. And my great-great-grandfather said to my grandfather, here, keep it and pass it on to future generations. Keep it and pass it on to future generations. Well, when I bought the family farm from Grandpa Russell, he gave me the ring and he said, now listen, I want you to restore it and keep it and pass it to future generations, because it needed some work. In fact, the setting was loose, and I went out to appraise a 1970 440 Plymouth Superbird, and when I got back in my office, I realized that after riding in the car with the owner that the setting was not in my ring, but I wasn't sure if that's where I had lost it. And it was a few days later in an envelope on my desk with this little note, had the setting inside it, and it said, I knew a 440 was a powerful engine, but I didn't know it could shake the setting out of a ring. So I knew I better get that ring restored, and I did, and it was made new, and it's a symbol of that circle of generations in Hebrew, the word dor, of how we can live inside God's circle of love in intimacy, or we're going to live outside in idolatry.
I had an on-again, off-again serious problem with cocaine. Had always used some substances, though, all throughout my life. And my first marriage suffered horribly from it. But, you know, at one point I was sick and tired, and I knew I had the void, and so I was always looking for something. And I hadn't completed college, but one of my lifelong goals was to become an attorney. Mm-hmm. And so I went back full hedge, and I guess you could say I really became addicted to school. Went back full speed, got my bachelor degree from IPFW in political science in 2 years. Wow. Yeah, 22-hour semesters, summers. In the meanwhile, we had 3 little kids at home still, and my wife was, at the time, was working factories. And yeah, we did what it took, and I had managed to put the substance abuse for the most part on the shelf during that period, and was accepted to law school and went down there and completed it in 3 years. And really had about 6 years with no involvement with cocaine at that point. But to myself, I was God. In fact, I even used to drive around Indianapolis, right, laughing at the police and drinking in my car and using drugs and just saying, no, you know, I am the law, I am God. And I worshiped all of the things that the world had to offer. And so a lot of emphasis on money and materialism and things like that.
You were a criminal defense attorney, right?
I was, yeah. I worked my way through law school at the Public Defender Agency and started doing that after law school, and just gradually weaned myself from public work and became a private attorney. And One of the things that made me successful was that I drew on my street, so to speak, past, right? And my clients identified with it. So I wasn't just a straight-laced lawyer. And that, and quite frankly, being a drug addict and, living on the street and doing things, I was good at what I did. And I would say wrong client, wrong day. I had a client in jail and had somebody bring me some money in an envelope, which wasn't uncommon. And when I opened it up, there was a little bit of cocaine, purposely, as a little gift to me. And I had fooled myself into thinking again, because I was God and I had things under control, that I could use it. And it just so happened, no such thing as an accident, but that was the day we were moving into our new offices. My partner and I at this point had got the suite at the top of the Gold Building in downtown Indianapolis.
That beautiful glass.
That beautiful glass, yeah, former IBM building, yeah. We had the top floor. So we could look down on the world, right? Yeah, and within 6 months, really everything I had worked so hard for was gone. I had been remarried at this time. My first marriage suffered horribly as a result of the prior drug abuse, and I'd been remarried and had a great home in north suburbs of Indianapolis. Drove a nice car, not quite as nice as these, but yeah, thought I had it all. And within 6 months, literally had lost it all. I had went from being one who defends to one actually who needed defended. I'd picked up criminal charges related to my drug use, professional sanctions from the Indiana board, and had lost everything. We literally moved up here homeless with all our possessions in a U-Haul. I believe within 2 days I'd found in Fort Wayne where they sold crack cocaine on the corner, but I was broke, and so began to sell off our items, stole items from my mother even, to pay for the drugs.
Because you needed the fix.
Yeah, I had the hole and I needed the fix, and was suicidal, and actually ended up checking in to the Parkview Behavioral Center for both the suicide issues and the substance abuse. And through that process, I came in contact with, I believe through divine intervention, my counselor. And she informed me, I got my body clean at Parkview and was in some of the 12-step programs around town. But she told me one day, she said, you know what, you have a spiritual void.
She said you have a spiritual void?
A spiritual void. And I said, really? What is that, right? And she says, you have a hole that you continue to try to fill with something, right? Education, the money, the cars obviously weren't enough, and so you went to the drugs. And she says, you should go to church. I got to tell you, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, my spirituality or belief in God was probably a -2, right? Do-gooders, holier than thous, right?
You were sand-hearted and you saw them as stone-hearted.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
And I thought, they don't want me, right? And I don't want them.
Yep. So she tells you you got a spiritual void.
She said I got a spiritual void. She says, you need to get to church, which I thought was interesting. Because her business, I thought, that's what I'm seeing you for, right? You know what? You are to fix me.
Right.
I mean, I was a lawyer, right?
Yes.
That was my mentality. You're sick, a doctor fixes you. You got a legal problem, I'm your man. And here I am to you, and you're supposed to be handling the inside stuff. So I thought, oh, she's got some agenda, right? Well, I went and I talked to my mom, and I explained that she had suggested church, the counselor did. She says, my stepdaughter, Jackie, right, goes to this really neat Wednesday night service at a place called Black Hawk. Well, you know what was going on this time, your end.
Yeah, well, the pastor that night was me. And I had responded to a calling from God to get my master's and doctorate, and Kelly Bird was gracious to allow me to volunteer as a teaching pastor at Blackhawk. And we had attempted to plant a church within a church on Wednesday nights. So it was fairly new. And you guys get brought up to the door. And do you remember what I said that night while you were in the audience? I had been perplexed all week because I thought God wanted me to listen in the service instead of deliver a message.
Yeah.
But the way I'm wired, I had the message anyway in case there was, in case I was wrong. And I remember the number range. It was 12 or 13 people shared that night. And I said, well, I just want to ask one more time. I have something I'm going to share, but I want to ask one more time because I thought God's prompting was that somebody was wanting to surrender his or her life to Christ tonight. And I felt really awkward saying that. I thought, maybe my connection's off, I didn't want it to feel uncomfortable or weird for anybody there. I wanted it to feel natural and authentic.
I mean, at the time, you were very non-pastoral, which at the time that was would have been the last thing I would have needed. Would have been a very formal structure, and so I'm convinced God led me there. And I said to my wife, I said, that was really neat, right? I wasn't planning on sharing or anything else because I wasn't raising my hand, even though she was telling me, this is why we're here. But we waited and almost left it because you were talking to other people. And I remember saying to you when you came out, I said, hi, I'm Troy Harder. This is my wife, Regan. I said, do we call you, are you minister or pastor? And you said, most people call me Mitch.
Yep.
And you said, what's going on? I said, well, I really enjoyed the service. And, I hadn't willingly stepped foot in a church in 23 years, I don't think.
You told me that night.
Okay, prior to that. And I said, I think I'm your guy.
Yep, I'll never forget that.
I said, I think I'm, which, and that I am convinced the Spirit literally pushed those words out. He had pushed me there. I mean, from the rehab to the counselor to my mom, all of the dots were connected. It's painful when we're stuck when we're stuck outside and it's just us and we have to deal with it all ourselves, right? And I didn't have anything to lose anyways, and so I told you, right, about the personal problems, the addiction and everything else. And you said, you know what, I'm the one person, you said, in this building who probably understands the most what you're going through. And then you had explained the process of surrender and everything else. And my wife, of course, was there. So you had explained, and I remember you asking, have you ever fully surrendered your heart to God before? And she said, you know what, I went through this system of religious education and everything else. She goes, and I don't know.
Exactly, I remember that. I don't know.
And so I remember we held hands, and you said, and you took us through Romans, actually. And I remember, and sincerely, I said, and you said, oh, we got to say this prayer, right? And I remember sincerely asking the question, I said, do I have to believe it?
Yep, I remember that.
And you kind of laughed and said, yeah, that's what Paul is saying here. And I said, I'm not ready. But my wife was, as you know, was more than ready that night. And she surrendered.
Amazing moment.
Her life to Christ on that. And I just watched it kind of with awe, right? And as we're walking out to the parking lot, of course, by this point, I think we're the only three left on the property.
Right.
And as we're walking out the car, I was curious. I said, do you feel any different? And she said, she goes, you know what? She goes, I can't really describe it. She goes, but I have a tremendous sense of peace.
I remember that word,
She goes,
peace.
Everything's going to be okay. And I said, really? And so, my mind, my worldliness, oh, okay, I'm going to beat this rap. Am I getting my house? Am I keeping my, And she goes, it's just going to be all right regardless. And wow, and over the course of the next week, I had seen tremendous changes in her.
And then you came back that next week. What was that date?
That would have been August 21st, 2003.
Okay. And I remember we talked, and we talked again afterwards, I think, right? And I said, you kept saying something like, I'm not ready. And I remember saying, I think I asked you this, and then you responded, but I said, are you trying to clean yourself up to come to God? Or are you willing to come to God to get cleaned up?
That's exactly what you said.
And I think you said, if I need to come to God to get cleaned up, and I can't get cleaned up to come to God, I need that now. You remember that?
Absolutely. And so, same thing. You know, and this was after the service again, because I'm still sitting back. I mean, I'm a lawyer,
Right.
Sitting back. I'm, the mind, self is still trying to connect and all. And I did. I did surrender my life to Christ. And I wish I could say everything was clean and rosy after that, and I've lived as a perfect, walked as a saint ever since. But now the enemy really wanted to get me. And I remember, like 4 days later, it was on a Sunday, I remember waking up early and going to use drugs. But I did come back, and you told her, just make sure he keeps coming back.
I did. I said, you make sure that he doesn't see this binge as a reason to not come back. And then you came back the next week.
Well, she told me that, and I was surprised because I thought they were the Stonehearts, right? And so we really had a home. So we came back the next week. Excuse me. Now, I am proud to say, only by the grace of God, that was the last time I've used cocaine.
Right. And I asked you to share your story that night, didn't I? Because I remember thinking when you came back, I want the stone-hearted, if there are any in the room, to deal with that Restoration Road can be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. You're a brand new believer, and then I wanted you to experience the family, the relationship, the mutual walk of that group, to be able to confess freely.
Yeah, and I just took, and normally I wouldn't have. And so I would say, that was Christ in me that gave me enough humility to go in this room full of strangers. Or maybe it was because they were strangers. People came up and they knew our financial situation.
Yeah.
And somebody sent us a money order anonymously in the mail, which I won't, but which is a practice I've actually personally done myself because it's so cool.
Yeah.
Anonymously. And it's also biblical.
Yes.
To not try to But then when we came back the next week, people had diapers, people had strollers.
It was incredible.
It was, like homecoming. And that next week, you had asked me and Regan, my wife, if we would share our story. Essentially, if we would tell the congregation what you and I just talked about. And we shared the story. And the most amazing thing was this young lady in the front row, and just broke out in tears in the middle of it, right? To the point where we actually had to stop giving our testimony.
Right.
And she said, I want what they've got.
I remember that.
See, we come to church, Regan wants what she sees, she wants that peace. I see it in Regan then, I want that peace. And that was phenomenal to me, that God was going to use my trash for his treasure. And to use it to help other people. And as you know, she converted that night. Her daughters downstairs converted. We were all baptized, which was really cool. About a month later, I think, maybe 2 months later. And people were coming up to both of us, both this young woman and myself and my wife, and telling us how much our story affected them. And that connection, right? That's actually what has meant the most. That allowed restoration to me because at that point it was beyond personal. It was, it wasn't stuff I was getting in my life, right? It was that, wow, somehow this whole mess of nothing but evil and selfishness and idolatry and sin, right? That somehow God could take that and pull people out of it themselves.
God was using you to bring restoration to others.
Yeah. and all credit to him, you know, and that's the first time. I mean, you know, by the nature of my profession, and I think the nature of our flesh, anyways, we want it to be about us. Right?
Yes.
It's something we're doing, and you know, I'm winning trials and whatnot, and yeah, it was amazing to me because he was just I was just the instrument, right? And it was amazing because we hadn't even been saved a month. Didn't think we were giving that story for anybody to get saved, right? I told you, I walked in there. Oh, let me do some talking, right? And next thing I know, it's not about me, it's about him. Touching this woman who, she wanted what I had. I don't know if I mentioned this because, as you recall, she was struggling with cocaine addiction.
Yeah, same issue.
Exact same issue.
I remember she left that night with a handful of phone numbers that she could call anybody if she ever was tempted again. And you've been through a lot since then. You had the preemie twins, who were, I remember seeing them in the hospital, and I remember your call, like it was yesterday, and they were about the size of my hand.
Yes, we did.
And they're 2 years old now?
Haley, yep, they're beautiful, Haley and Hannah. And yeah, they were in Parkview for a month, 3 pounds each when they were born.
And you've watched as you've had that clay heart of humility toward God. You watched him walk you down Restoration Road. It can be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But if somebody's watching today, I mean, could you tell them how they could find restoration, how they could find hope? Maybe they got the same sand-hearted stuff that you had going on. Maybe it's a little bit different. Could you just share with them how they could walk Restoration Road?
To have faith in God, and to try different experiences in churches. You know, I know people who have come to faith in Catholic churches and Lutheran churches, and also non-denominational churches like, you know, Blackhawk when we attended there. And if it's not the right fit, you know, I would encourage you just to try them out with an open mind, and to express that humility, to be willing to share with somebody. I was shocked how accepted we were, and I believe the Lord will lead you to the same situation if you just let him.
The Word of God, the people of God, the Spirit of God walk with us on Restoration Road. Troy, thank you so much.
So good to see you again, Mitch.
Oh, God bless you.